have this next conversation with Dr. Austin Tam George, as you've seen in the welcoming slide. He is former Commissioner for Information in Rivers State, and he is also an alumni of the Harvard Kennedy School. Thank you for joining us this morning.
Thanks for having me.
Is that disturbing news that you heard? And I remember the last conversation we had was around communication.
Yeah.
Ensuring that we communicate with people in the right way so that we don't get certain kinds of reactions. The front page of some of the papers this morning talk about the looting of a warehouse in FCT belonging to the Agriculture Department of the territory, and some parts of the country also. It calls for the federal government to implement the right policies and all of that. Of course, there's also been several calls, including this morning from our guest during the first segment, Babatunde Ogala, senior advocate of Nigeria, who is saying, look, we seem to be giving so much attention to calling out the federal government that we kind of ignore or excuse the state government from doing whatever is necessary. Concerning that looting of a warehouse and a number of other places like that in the country, what is your take, and what do you think the people are signaling as a result?
No, I think the message is clear. There's a food crisis in this country. We're in the middle of a very serious economic crisis, and we need specific policy directions, and we need results as soon as possible. Just as you said in our last discussion when I was last here, we discussed a lot about the role that state governments have to play. Sometimes we give disproportionate attention to what happens at the federal level, to sometimes neglect what happens in the states. And I believe that the state governors can do far much than much more than what they are doing now. For instance, Nigeria has some of the best climate conditions in the world. We have some of the best soil patterns in the world. There is no reason why we shouldn't declare a state of emergency in the agricultural sector and get our people back to work. A lot of our people are already doing agriculture, but at the subsistent level because of lack of funding. And now, if you mechanize the sector, you will see that there will be a great deal of commercial activity, a great deal of industrial activity happening in the agro sector. That is not going on at the state levels. Then there is also the problem of security. You remember in the last administration, there was a lot of money given, running into billions of naira given to farmers under the Anchor Borrower Scheme. But at the point when these farmers went to the farms to cultivate, they were complaining a lot about security. A lot of them were being kidnapped, ransoms demanded. And so we've seen the interface now between security problems and agricultural products, coming to the market. So we need to make sure that there is a great deal of focus on these twin issues of bringing about food sustainability around the larger question of improving security situation in the country. So this is a double whammy. A lot of people are concerned that even when we have workers, we have farmers who are willing to go to the farms, they are now complaining a lot that they are being kidnapped and they have no access to their farms. So we need to make sure that we deal with these issues about food sustainability and the crisis in the security sector.
Interestingly, part of the lot of people that, as you said, that are complaining about insecurity are governors themselves. Some governors are complaining about insecurity and saying, look, you know what, I need to talk to the president. And of course, we remember in the previous administration, the federal government, the president said he sent back a governor, go deal with your issues yourself. Now, a good number of people, as has been established, are saying the governors need to do more. But is it that they don't know what to do or what? We also know that there are federal legislators that represent states in the two chambers of the National Assembly. We also know from what has been confirmed to us again this morning that there are representatives of the states in the cabinet of Mr. President. According to Mr. Ogala, at least one minister per state and one minister per region. So is it that the communication they have, these federal representatives, to the states, is it that they don't get to the states? What exactly do you think is happening?
I think it's just a failure of leadership, Ayo, if we want to be honest about it. Because I have been in government, let me give you an instance, where there is a massive failure. Every state government has what is called a security vote. It can run into billions of naira per annum. Billions of naira. And these are the same state governments.
Just a second. The state government,
Yes.
each state governor
has what they call the security vote.
that
Now,
that
the security
runs into
vote, billions of naira. Now, that is typically not accounted for. And so what you expect is that these state governors will use the money for the security votes, from the security votes, to invest in providing security. So what do? Typically, they just buy a few whistles or buttons, for the police, and you don't really get proper accounting when it comes to those kind of funds. My own suggestion will be that, look, there are ways you can combat unemployment by diverting the money meant for security vote to create jobs. Because look, once you give people an alternative path to criminality, they will choose that path because they will say, look, I'm better off being gainfully employed. It could be support for entrepreneurs. It could be investment in healthcare. It could be, the money could be used for investment in education. These are alternative paths that people will readily choose in place of criminality. Now, if you ask the question about what happens to security votes in the states, that's a completely different conversation altogether. Now, the point is that we keep problematizing situations that we can easily resolve. And my sense is that if we follow the budgets, if we follow the money and say, look, invest in education, invest in agriculture, these are things that will in the short and long term provide gainful employment. But nobody is talking about that. All you see is that money is thrown at the problem, but there is no proper accounting in terms of how much exactly is used to create jobs, how much is used to create infrastructure, how much is used to actually create the situations that can combat insecurity. So we have these very complex economic problems across the country.
So you're saying that if the governors who collect security votes that runs into billions of naira dispense these resources rightly, we will not have any form of criminality?
Absolutely. In any case, on a sector-by-sector basis, every governor has funds. In terms of the fiscal year, they have funds for education, they have funds for agriculture, they have funds for all of these things. Now, you have very little oversight happening as far as the state assemblies are concerned, because constitutionally, as you know, the governors don't answer to the president, they don't answer to the National Assembly, they are answer to the people through the state assemblies. But what you see is that in typical cases, the state assemblies do not function to establish the checks and balances that should bring about good governance. So there's a complete failure of government. So what we are saying is that we need to completely rethink how we administer in a way that will deliver service and change the material conditions of our people. We have unemployment rates, that are baffling. We have inflation rates that are baffling. We have a major national crisis right now. And you don't get the sense that governors at all levels are responding with the sense of urgency that the situation requires.
I'm glad that you are a student and alumni of the Harvard School of Governance, so you want to help us understand something. So how does the security votes work? Where does it originate from? Does it originate from the federal government or from the state coffers? Because my apologies, I'm asking because we know, at least on paper, what the take home of a governor should be. So if the security votes is more than his take home, no wonder then a number of people will say why they would do anything to get into power.
The security votes are not necessarily money allocated to the governor for personal use. They are supposed to be emergency funds to respond to security situations, security crisis in the state, in each state. Now, the governor can choose to do what he likes in terms of deploying that specific resource to stabilize security situations in their states. But you don't find transparency in the deployment of the resources. And these are the same governors who go about talking about security crisis, but you've got the resources to respond to these things. And my sense is that you respond to security problems not by simply buying guns and boats and the rest of that. You can actually create jobs. When you create jobs, people have no appetite. They don't have appetite for criminality. So the point I'm making is that we maybe need to completely rethink how we deploy state resources. Some people say Nigeria has no money. Look, I can tell you from my own experiences that Nigeria has resources. What we lack is transparency and wise deployment of public resources. So I think that the state governors, the federal government, they need to completely rethink how public resources are used and open the space so that people can see, the kind of transparency that exists in terms of the deployment of public resources.
I'm sure my colleagues will want to take you up on that security vote angle, but let's come back to the issue of the vandalization of those facilities in the various parts of the state. Case in point, at this time, the looting of a warehouse in FCT. One of the issues that Maupe raised this morning, highlighted, and of concern definitely, is that of the 7 people that were accosted by the police, 2 of them are security operatives themselves. So what does that say about anything to you?
Well, hunger, I'm not justifying criminality, but it just goes to show, it signalizes that when people are increasingly desperate for food, as I said, they will be drawn more and more towards criminality. We've seen situations like that, where people just invade, warehouses and loot, the warehouses during the COVID-19 crisis, if you remember. But there was a connection between the lack of the government's ability and transparency in deploying these resources, these foods and other resources to the people, and simply, keeping them in these warehouses when there was actually a massive need for these resources out there. And so the people just resorted, to self-help. I think that, the fact that we had allegedly we have, some security personnel amongst these people arrested, shows the degree of desperation that exists out there. It brings us to the question of what the government can do, because this is ultimately, this is just a symptom of a bigger problem. For instance, earlier last week, we got reports, headlines all over the country, that Nigeria is receiving 25,000 tons of grains, from Ukraine. And, I thought at first this was sarcasm, because why would a war-torn country like Ukraine be making humanitarian food donations to a country like Nigeria? So it shows you the degree of problems. Nigeria has some of the best weather conditions. We have some of the best soil conditions. We have the population to go in massively into agriculture and to make sure we bring food sustainability to our people. Why should we be receiving grains from a war-torn country like Ukraine? So these are massive indications that we have a serious economic crisis, but more importantly, we have a serious leadership crisis. We want to know what can be done to bring food sustainability to Nigerians, and I think that the government at all levels, have a responsibility to respond to the crisis.
Well, but that still doesn't excuse the fact that there is a lot of work for government. I mean, you mentioned it a little while ago. Now, we have been talking about agriculture for eons. I'm young enough to know that as far back as the second half of the 70s, the Obasanjo government at the time started talking about Operation Feed the Nation. The succeeding government converted it to what they called Green Revolution. And on and on and on until even this Fourth Republic, where from, on and off, we had a situation where one government or the other is talking about these things. So it is the federal government in most cases that is talking about food initiatives, agricultural initiatives at the national level. But the federal government doesn't have land, except the FCT. It is the state governments that have the land. So do you see a disconnect in communication? Or do you see, what exactly do you think is responsible for us not achieving these things at a holistic level?
Yeah, but I just told you, this is a failure of government. It's a failure of government.
Yes, you said that.
The Land Use Act at the state levels, for instance, leaves the ownership of the land to the state government.
I get that.
Yes.
You said as well, and a number of people have said that the federal government needs to take the leadership in some cases. And I would say that is perhaps one of the things that the federal government is doing, taking leadership, taking initiative, and perhaps expecting that the states will also buy into it. So is there a gap in communication? Because they really do meet.
What the president, for instance, can do is to hold a meeting with the state governors and say, look, we may have our own policy here at the federal level, but it has to find resonance on the ground at the state level. After all, every state government, as far as I know, has a ministry for agriculture. In Rivers State, we have a ministry for agriculture, for instance. So every ministry of agriculture has a responsibility to domesticate a plan that can respond to the food crisis in each state. And the problem is this is not happening. And why is it not happening, Ayo? It is not happening because of an abject failure of leadership. There is no problem with the land. There is no problem with the climate. There is a problem with lack of vision in terms of responding to the challenges of food security. And I am just telling you, Ayo, that the state governors have a responsibility to respond to these things. And they are not responding to them.
The question is how? What is missing?
What is missing is clear...
Let me give you another idea about this. The AFDB is a multilateral organization that has been talking about this, what do you call it now? Some agricultural initiative, SAPZ they call it, so that the states will come up with these agro-industrial processing zones, specialized agro-industrial processing zones across the nation. And a number of states are already buying into it with the assurances of the federal government, because of course that that it has to be a G2G kind of thing. So what is missing in the conversation over the years? That's the question that I'm asking. Irrespective of who is in government, something needs to happen.
No, it cannot be irrespective of who is in government, because there's always a question of continuity. Let me give you an example that I know so well in my state, in Rivers State. Under the Amechi administration, for instance, there was a massive investment in what they call the Songhai farms. It was an industrial farming mechanism, that had the potential, of transforming the agricultural sector, making Rivers State not only food sufficient, but was building the capacity towards, food sustainability across the region. But what happened? As soon as Amechi left government, we came into government in 2015, and there was a complete abandonment of the sector. The Songhai farms, in fact, I understand recently, that Governor Fubara is beginning to putting mechanisms in place to revamp agricultural sector. But that's because he's just come into government less than a year ago. But I'm telling you that as far as Rivers State is concerned, for 8 full years after the Amechi administration, the Songhai farms, the industrial fish farms, all of them completely abandoned. I'm saying this from experience because I was part of the government myself. So you can replicate this across the country in the states. So you may have a good administration, that had a vision and started actually to implement this. But as soon as that administration leaves, you can't guarantee that those kind of visions are going to continue. So in any case, in Rivers, it didn't continue. And I just put it to you, Ayo, that for 8 years, the agricultural sector was completely abandoned. And I mean, it's very gladdening that the new Fubara administration is now beginning to think of how they can revamp the agricultural sector. Now imagine if we have continuity across the country in terms of disproportionate emphasis in food production across the board. You are going to have a lot of these things. So the point is, we can't have a country of over 200 million people, and we are getting food aid from a country that is war-torn, only 37 million people in Ukraine.
Going by the example, my apologies, going by the example that you cited of River State, of course, some people will also cite that in several other parts of the country. Do you see politics as an inhibition to our food production agenda?
Well, political actions are always influenced by the agreements or disagreements with predecessors and successors. But what I am talking about, it has to do basically with lack of continuity. I mean, if you have an administration that is focused on certain sectors, and you can see the trajectories towards progress, and the administration leaves and there is lack of continuity, it's going to affect the development of the state. Let me give you one more example, because I followed that closely in Cross River State. You probably remember that when Donald Duke was governor, he completely transformed the tourist sector, in Cross River State. We knew about the Obudu cattle ranch. We knew about all kinds of the Tinapa investment resort. As soon as Donald Duke left government, over the years, we've not seen continuity. In fact, the other day I was looking at, what some investors were saying concerning that resort. The Obudu cattle ranch completely abandoned as soon as Donald Duke, left office. So the point I'm making is that, yes, we can talk a lot about, people winning elections, but you can win elections and governance is a completely different thing. So we don't have the quality of leadership that can actually bring development, on a sustainable basis, to our people. And this is the result that we are seeing.
All right, Chamberlain.
Yeah, morning, Dr. Sam, George. Just wondering, having seen the example of Professor Bathanaji's geometric integrated power project in Abia State, having a facility scalable to 188 megawatts. Thankfully, he says he's working on something else, which is about 1,000 thereabout. But do you see states, because we did ask him the question, why it took that long and what's the ideal time? And he says it's just 3 years. It can't happen in 3 years, meaning any government that really wants to approach that can achieve that in one term. So is there a chance from the way you see things playing out now, is it likely that we may see any state whatsoever wanting to latch onto that? And who knows, there might be just this bandwagon effect, because if we get it right in that power sector, there'll be no telling of what we can achieve if we sort that.
Okay, what we've seen so far, in the specific case of Abia State regarding the presence of private investors in the power sector, shows what can happen when there is a good synergy between the public sector, that is government, and private investors on a sector-by-sector basis. But you see, this kind of synergy by themselves do not produce results for eternity. It has to continue. There has to be continuity. The drivers of that power project are alive now, and they seem to be working with the administration in Abia State. But what's the picture going to be like, when Governor Oti leaves office? What's the blueprint for power sustainability in Abia State? And now that the space has been opened, for investment in the power sector, especially at the state levels, how much of that kind of stimulus are we seeing across the states to achieve energy independence at the sub-regional level? So these are questions of leadership. These are questions of public policy. And it will be exciting to see on a state-by-state basis how the state governors are going to respond clearly to these challenges of development. I think that for each developmental challenge, there is an opportunity to move the needle in terms of providing good quality governance. My worry is that we may not have the quality of leadership, at the state level. Well, we are yet to see it. We are yet to see it. We need to make sure that state governors rise to the challenge of leadership. I believe that our constitution has, a lot of people talk about how we need to restructure, how we need to decentralize power from the state, from the federal government to the states. But I remember the song, in the 70s, now that you found love, what do you want to do with it? The same thing when they decentralize power, to the states, you've got the power. You have FAC allocation, you have all kinds of allocations, internally generated revenue. How much of developmental strides are we seeing in the states? I think that they are not proportionate in terms of how much the states are seeing. We need to see more. We need more leadership. And we need civil society to be strengthened so that questions can be asked beyond the political sphere concerning accountability and transparent use of public resources.
Well, I do not know how much time we have left, but I cannot resist asking you, I mean, knowing that you have been a professional in the private sector for many years, what exactly did you make of the federal government's attempt to now say that they want to, streamline government and implement the Oronsaye report?
The Oronsaye report, I think, was prepared in 2012. A lot of things have changed. A lot of things have changed. Since then, more ministries have been created. So if you say you want to implement the Oronsaye report, that's probably a good thing at the theoretical level. But ultimately, the question has to be, how do we want to, generally discipline the use of public resources in a way that is accountable, in a way that is beneficial to the most amounts of people in Nigeria? For instance, Mark, let me give a single example of waste, in my opinion. Every state has a pilgrimage board. I believe that, pilgrims should go on religious tours and only get consular support wherever they go, whether it's to Israel or whether it's to Saudi Arabia. They can sponsor their own trips and then get consular support if they have any problems wherever they visit. But we have a massive waste, in my opinion, going on in that sector, where pilgrims are funded by governments across the country. That's a massive waste. I don't see how many Oronsaye reports are going to help that. So if you want to implement the Oronsaye report, theoretically that's fine. But then what about the various points of wastage, such as the ones I just mentioned? It takes a great deal of rethinking of our public institutions and how money is spent for us to be able to arrive at, spending money in a way that is responsible.
And some people will still docket it in the Department of Political Will. But anyway, let's close now. There are those who ask, first of all, in the River State, do you think that the feud, or alleged feud, if we can use that term, between the two governors, do you think it's over?
The governor, which of the governors?
Well, the governor, Fubara, and his predecessor.
No, but we can only have one governor at a time. Fubara.
Yes, but do you think the feud is over?
No, I think Fubara's focus is very clear. He's focusing on how you can revamp the state. I've been monitoring events very closely. He has the massive support of the people. Governor Wike, who was my boss when I was commissioner, is now minister for Abuja. I think his focus should be in Abuja. And
okay.
Fubara, has a clear mandate of the people to drive agenda. Okay. So he has the full support of the people to fulfill his promises.
Let's close to this one. You're from River State, as well as late Herbert Wigwe. Our condolences again. How did you receive that news?
I was very shocked because I happened to be close to the family. His father, Shengo Wigwe, is a very good friend of mine. Herbert and I worked together when I was commissioner. We had the Rivers at 50 in 2017. I was commissioner for information, and during the committee work, Herbert was the chairman of the fundraising committee, I think. Okay. And we worked very closely. He had boundless energy, he had passion, a very self-driven young man.
Absolutely.
So I really condole the family, and I wish that he will find rest and his family.
We say amen with you, Austin Tam George, former commissioner for information in River State, as well as an alumni of the Harvard Kennedy School of Governance. Thank you so much for your time this morning.
Thanks for inviting me.
Chairman, any messages from us?
Well, we'll have to wait until tomorrow, and apologies to everybody. But we do see them, and as always, we thank you all for letting us be a part of your day today. We'll see you next time. I'm Chamberlain Osov. Goodbye.
I'm wishing you a very productive week ahead. Thank you for watching. I'm Maupe Ogun Yusuf.
Amaya Makinde. Have a productive and profitable day.